Hello everybody and welcome back to Red Eagle Politics. Make sure you like this video down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. And the past few days have been absolutely crazy in terms of politics, in terms of the way that these midterm elections are moving in. And it seemed for quite a little while that it wasn't appearing to be as much of a red wave, at least if you bought the narrative, if you bought the polling. And it seemed like a lot of Republicans were dooming. But not anymore. Now Republicans lead in the generic ballot by 3.5 points. And not only that, they are doing much better in a lot of governor's races across the country. We're going to cover several of them in this video. But it's important to note that Republicans are leading in New York. New York, the state of New York that voted for Biden by, 23 points or so. Lee Zeldin has the lead in this coefficient poll. He was not leading in their last poll. He's gaining in every single poll in the state of New York. That is not a typo or a verbal typo. That is not a miscommunication. This is legitimately the case. And I'm going to talk about this race, among others, in this video. Tudor Dixon appears to be in much better shape than she was even a week or two ago. Minnesota, could Republicans at least pick off a statewide office, even if Jensen falls short? It all needs to be looked into. But first, I have to tell you guys once again about redeaglepolitics.com. Make sure you guys become a member on the website. It's just 16 cents a day. That's $5 a month. Not every video of mine makes it onto the main channel. But you can get all the videos and more for exclusive members on the website. Did a video there this week. Do 1 to 2 videos a week and to do more leading up to the midterms. Also, we have our Discord server for members only. And we also have my newsletter, my articles where I've been talking about the midterms. Make sure you guys sign up at redeaglepolitics.com. But furthermore, Coefficient dropped this poll today, and it was out of nowhere. This morning, I wake up and I see a poll out of Michigan that has that race basically in a virtual tie, and Republicans are leading in New York for the governorship, which is crazy. And you look into this, and it's like, it's funny that Republicans have not led a poll yet in Pennsylvania, but somehow they're winning the New York governorship, and it kind of shows that governor's races are more localized. They're less nationalized. Kathy Hochul is hated. We could pull up the 2022 crime statistics yet again, but they are absolutely out of control, especially in New York City. They might say murders are down a little bit from last year, but they're still up from a few years ago, and violent crime as a whole is increasing this year. And Hochul's proposals for violent crime and her criminal justice, quote-unquote, reform that lets criminals back onto the streets is not popular. Who would have guessed? I mean, you look at 2021, that was the canary in the coal mine when a Republican won the Seattle DA's election in Seattle, one of the furthest left places. That's Antifa land right there. And now you're seeing Lee Zeldin run a campaign that has been attacking Hochul for crime. He's talking just about kitchen table issues that matter, and he's not exactly virtue signaling to the left to do this either. He's, is a congressman who voted to object to 2020, and he is potentially in the driver's seat to have a shot to win New York. I think this is lean Democrat as of now, but it's possible that by Election Day, if Zeldin keeps up the momentum, the legend of Zeldin may be real, and he very may well could win this thing. He could. And this is only one poll. It's the only poll that has him ahead. Survey USA showed a massive shift from last poll, and Coefficient did too. They had this as a 6-point race before. Now Zeldin has taken the lead. Survey USA, which is not really that much of a reputable pollster, usually vastly overestimates one side or the other, mainly the Democrats, but they had Hochul in August winning by 24. Now they have Hochul up by 6. Quinnipiac, one of the furthest left-biased polls that we've seen over the past few years in election cycles. What do we see there? It's basically within the margin of error, and Hochul's only up by 4 in Quinnipiac. Siena tended to be the left-leaning outlier of this election, and they showed Zeldin gaining by 6 points from the previous pollster. And Marist, Zeldin's down by 8, according to Marist, and he's got the momentum. I'm not saying he's going to win, but it could be very, very close in New York State, and that is something that nobody initially really anticipated to happen, and this is crazy. And if Zeldin's going to be doing well, if he's going to get within striking distance, you're probably going to see the Attorney General's race flip. You're probably going to see Republicans sweep the battleground districts in New York State in terms of the congressional races. This is true, and it all adds up. but there's a chance. You never know. But we're sitting here, we're less than 3 weeks out of the election, 2.5 weeks out, and Zeldin's leading a poll. It's going to be interesting to see what happens between now and Election Day, but Kathy Hochul's campaign is a total train wreck. It's crazy what's going on there. But you look at the fact that Republicans are leading polls in New York, Oregon, Minnesota, they're closing in on Michigan. It kind of shows that Democrats are going to struggle in a lot of their blue states because a lot of people are fed up. A lot of independent voters are fed up, not just with the Biden administration, but the governors in these states that are very weak on crime, which is a very pressing issue, and it's being brought to the forefront. Education is a very big issue. In terms of these statewide races, Republicans should be hammering that more. That's what helped Youngkin win in Virginia. But still, it's an issue that they are capitalizing on to a certain degree, which should be noted here. But it's not just New York. New York is one of these states where you see this, and we saw the poll drop today, and that was crazy. But the red wave is not just bleeding into New York, no pun intended. Michigan is another one. And the polls, I guess you would say 2 months ago, had Gretchen Whitmer leading by 18 percentage points in the polls in RCP. Whitmer was up by 18, or so they say. She was never up by 18. But the polls showed her with an 18-point lead. She was well above 50%. I always thought it would be close, but I thought that Dixon was probably not the favorite. However, what did we see here? We saw Dixon start to get funding, started to get on the air. She got up in the 40s. Whitmer went down. And you see right there Whitmer +9. But Whitmer also had a 10-point lead a month ago today. And that lead was relatively stable until early to mid-October. She was up by 11.3%, and Dixon started to gain. She got more funding. She did fairly well in the debate. She hit Whitmer for her handling of COVID, definitely refreshing a lot of people's minds about that. And you talk about abortion becoming less of a pressing issue than it was a few months ago for a lot of voters, and you see Dixon starting to do better. Dixon is within 3 points right now. And you look at this, Insider Advantage, the most accurate pollster in Michigan in 2020, has this race as a tie. Emerson had Whitmer up by 5, but still below 50. Signal had the same exact result with a much larger sample size. And then Mitchell Research, which is one of the better pollsters in Michigan, Mitchell, they released a poll this morning that has this race as a 2-point ball game. Dixon is well within the margin of error. And people were like, Whitmer's going to win by a safe margin. Whitmer's running away with this. Really, she's running away with this election. She's fumbling the election right now. And Dixon is staying on message. And you have a lot of people, and I wish I'd talked about this a little bit more in my Michigan video, but you have a lot of people that are going to be like, abortion is going to hurt Dixon because it's on the ballot. And you might say, okay, well, that's going to energize voters to turn out for Gretchen Whitmer on the Democrat side. A lot of them were already enthusiastic on the issue, regardless if they really cared that much about the issue to turn out based off of an amendment. But either way, let's say the amendment passes, sadly, and Dixon's past statements on the issue are controversial to independent voters, so they say. Okay, take that at face value. The bottom line is that there are voters who do not like Gretchen Whitmer who may vote yes on that will be now more incentivized to vote for Tudor Dixon because the amendment being on the ballot, separating that issue away from the governor's race. That's only going to help Tudor Dixon out. And this is true. It depends on turnout. It depends on turnout in West Michigan. Does Dixon do better than Trump among ancestral Republicans? I think she will. She's backed by the DeVos family. There's pros and cons to that, obviously. In terms of getting the rural turnout, a lot of those voters, even voters who may have voted for Whitmer, the ancestral Dems may have voted for Whitmer, basically turned on Whitmer during the 2020 election cycle because of COVID, and they're still upset about it. They're not going to vote for Whitmer. They're probably going to vote for Dixon. You talk about Dixon potentially doing better than Donald Trump in a place like Oakland County because of the turnout differential, because of the red wave, because of, Biden regret that does exist. She only has to do a little bit better than Donald Trump there in order to get the margin of victory. And you talk about turnout potentially dipping in Detroit because it is a midterm year. The path to victory is there. I covered this in my last video, but the margin has narrowed significantly since then. And Mitchell is probably one of the better pollsters in Michigan. It still has a left-leaning bias. This is true. But the fact that polls in Michigan right now are showing Whitmer up by 3, and you look at the trajectory compared to years past, that would mean that Dixon probably could very well win this election. RCP says it's Dixon plus 3, taking the poll trajectory into account, comparing past cycles 18 days away from the election, which is true. And RCP actually moved Michigan to the Republican column. They say it is going to be a GOP pickup, which would be absolutely huge if it does happen. Whitmer is somebody the Democrats have propped up as a future either VP pick or presidential contender, and that would be 100% out the window if she were to lose to Tudor Dixon, and Michigan would actually have decent leadership. And if the polls are this close, that means Republicans are going to likely win the AG race there over psychopath Dana Nessel, and there's a chance they also could take the Secretary of State's race as well. Beyond that point, that's Michigan. Minnesota, there were some polls out of Minnesota as well. I'm less confident on Minnesota. Trafalgar released a poll recently that had Jensen actually in the lead. Rounding the margins there, they have it as a tie. And then there was a poll earlier in the week from the Minnesota Post that has Walz up by 5, basically putting this race well within the margin of error. Now, let me say, Jensen has problems with the base. I mean, a lot of people initially didn't really trust him. This is a guy that has done campaign rallies with Joe Jorgensen and BLM activists ahead of the 2020 election. He's not a pro-Trump guy. He's really nowhere to be found. I'm really less confident in Jensen's ability to get the rural turnout. Could he do a little bit better in the suburbs than the Republican nominee for governor in 2018? Probably, especially because of the changes in the national environment, but we'll have to see. If Walz goes down, it's not going to be because Jensen is such a good candidate, but it's going to be because Walz's track record is awful. It also depends on the third-party share of the vote. Typically, it's higher in Minnesota than it is in other states, which could help Republicans because a lot of the third-party voters typically tend to be further left, and when there's less third-party voters, typically Republicans do worse. It's possible Republicans do pick off the Attorney General's race. Keith Ellison is not very well liked. He's not a popular figure. If he was running in any year other than 2018, he probably would have lost the general election, although there's no third-party candidate for that race, which could really pose some problems. But Minnesota in and of itself is a state that's a little bit of a train wreck. Let's go back to the national view here. Let's go over to Minnesota. Because you talk about the rural areas. All the rural areas could get much redder, but what it comes down to is Minneapolis-St. Paul. Because that is where a lot of the population is in the state, kind of how, to a much lesser extent than this, obviously, but it's kind of like how Chicago controls the state of Illinois. If you take out Cook County, Trump would have won the state of Illinois, but that's not how exactly this works. And also Duluth, you talk about the other metro areas that are there. Voters in those places still do vote heavily Democrat. So even though you look at a lot of the rural counties in the state of Minnesota, Minnesota in and of itself is an utter train wreck. I mean, this is a state where not only is it immune to a lot of midterm waves by many metrics, but it's also a state where you saw the cities, the major cities there where the population center is Minneapolis, burned to the ground over a lie in 2020. And then you see the voters in these places, in these precincts, move vastly to the left. They never learn. These people are not going to learn. If Republicans are going to win the state, they're probably going to be doing better in like the exurbs. They're going to have to run it up in the rural areas. I think it could be close, but I'm not entirely sure Jensen is going to get everybody on board. Now, thankfully for Jensen, he tapped a very conservative lieutenant governor pick, Matt Burke, and they're running as a ticket. Matt Burke is awesome. I think that if Jensen wins, it would be a net positive based off of that fact alone. But we'll really just have to wait and see. But either way, you're looking at the movement in the polls. Even if you want to say, well, Trafalgar might be overestimating Republicans, compared to the last round of polling, they show movement to the right by 3 points. You see movement to the right by far in Michigan. You talk about the polls here. I mean, it's insane. You compare the past polls we saw out of basically everything, and you see the movement to the right in the state. You see the movement to the right in New York. And this is a recurring theme. The generic ballot, of course, across the entire country. A red wave is brewing, and it's going to trickle down to the governorships as well. Yes, they are less nationalized than the congressional races, House races, Senate races, etc., but the national environment does still have an effect on them as well. So keep that in mind. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video. Like this video down below, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications so you never miss another video. Follow me on social media. The links are all in the description down below. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Red Eagle, out.